let's not make any bones about it. Carolina Panthers have a lot of needs this offseason.
To say the least.
They're going to have to evaluate just about every position in every different avenue of adding, right? Cody Whitehair, former Pro Bowl guard, 8 years with the Chicago Bears, was just released.
Really?
They should explore what it would take to bring in a player like that. Not saying they should do it, but every position you essentially have to see what's out there. But that's not to say you fill every position the same way, right? It's not just Dan Morgan talks with the scouts, they like a guy, they make it happen. It is that way, right? Like, you want to bring in an edge rusher, it could just be Dan Morgan and the scouts like him, you tell Brant Tillis to negotiate, you get the free agent. You want to draft a running back in the 5th, it might just be you like a prospect, you send in his name. Some are more complicated than that. Some are a lot more complicated than that. Wide receivers should be treated differently. Specifically, number 1 wide receiver should be treated differently. Doesn't have to be more complicated, just differently. Do you know what they should do for the number 1 wide receiver? They should call up Bryce Young and say, Bryce, who do you want? Again, I didn't say it had to be complicated. You call up Bryce Young and you go, Bryce, who do you want as your number 1 wide receiver? And you may look at me and say, that is the most ridiculous thing. He is a second-year player. He has so much on his plate. He's got to worry about getting better. He's got to worry about the offense. He's got to be talking with Canales. He can't be also picking wide receivers. There are certain positions that just have to be linked. Look around the NFL. Look around the NFL. Who are the best combos? Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase played together in college. Really good friends. Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, they're like the godfather of each other's children. They are best friends. Tua and Jalen Waddle, college teammates. You can go on and on and on and on and on and on. Look at some of the all-time greats, right? Heck, Tom Brady didn't go anywhere without his Gronk, right? He always took him along. Like, those things matter. C.J. Stroud reportedly pretty much drafted Tank Dell. The Texans drafted C.J. Stroud number 2 overall. His first thing was, thank you, oh my gosh, I'm so happy, thank you, oh good, this is awesome, I always wanted to be in the NFL. His second thing was, draft Tank Dell. That worked out really, really well. He's a mid-round pick, looked like a Pro Bowler before he got hurt. I only know this because of fantasy, but don't judge me. Go look at C.J. Stroud's production with Tank Dell and without Tank Dell. Still played well, still protected the ball, but he was much more explosive with Tank Dell. They're buddies. So this offseason, there are going to be a lot of potential wide receivers. Mike Evans, Michael Pittman, Hollywood Brown, Calvin Ridley, everybody that isn't a first-round pick in the NFL draft because the Panthers have the 32nd overall pick. All of those options, how do you sort through them? How do you decide? This is how. Hey, Bryce, who do you want? Who do you have a relationship with? Who are you working out with in the offseason? Who? Tell us. There's a reason why at the trade deadline I was saying you should explore Jameson Williams. Because Bryce Young's best season in college came when he was throwing to Jameson Williams at Alabama. And I thought you might get a little dented can special because he had a 6-game suspension at the beginning of this past year. Gambling. Happens. So what the Panthers should do is very, very simple. I don't care if you bring in Bryce Young into the decision-maker's room for offensive, like Cody Whitehair, right? I don't think you need Bryce coming in and saying, I watched film of Chicago from 3 years ago when Cody Whitehair was at his peak, and he's a great player, and I think I would really benefit from him. I don't need that sign-off, right? You tell him who his offensive line is going to be. Obviously, everybody on defense. I mean, if you're looking to draft someone like from Alabama or something, and that player was around when Bryce Young was there, you want to bring him in and be like, hey, what kind of guy is he? Feel free to use him as a resource, but you don't have to use him as the be-all, end-all. But for the number 1 wide receiver, I think you should. I think he should have veto power. I think unlimited vetoes, right? I learned the lesson about unlimited vetoes when my wife and I we were thinking of names for our son, It starts with like, we each get 5 vetoes, right? 5, like, absolutely not. That name's not in the running. So what do you both figure out pretty quickly? You suggest ridiculous names until they use all 5 of their vetoes, and then you're like, cool, now I get to throw any name I want into the ring. So you have to give unlimited vetoes. Because like the other stuff matters also, but just not as much. Dave Canales worked with Mike Evans, okay? So if Dave Canales is saying Mike Evans is exactly what Bryce Young needs, we need to bring in Mike Evans. He needs a 6'4", 6'5", however tall he is, veteran that's got 1 billion 1,000-yard seasons. We need to bring in Mike Evans. I just worked with him last year. Mm-hmm. Bryce Young should be able to say veto. Because guess what? On 3rd and 9, with 1 minute and 20 left in a game, Dave Canales isn't the one that's going to have to trust Mike Evans to make a play. That's going to have to be Bryce Young. And guess what else is going to have happen? When you may say, like, well, Dave Canales can just tell him to make the throw. You're right. He could. And Bryce could throw it up and maybe it would work. But when Mike Evans drops the ball, Bryce Young's going to have to be the one to go back to him on the next play. And when Bryce Young misses Mike Evans on a 3rd down and he's open and he checks it down to the running back, Mike Evans is going to have to trust Bryce Young that it wasn't personal. Like those types of things matter. And Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, they miss a ton. You can go find them on YouTube. There's like entire collections of Jamar Chase running open downfield, right? Made by somebody who Jamar Chase was on their fantasy team, and they just hate Joe Burrow for missing him, right? This is every clip of Joe Burrow missing Jamar Chase for easy touchdowns. And guess what? Jamar Chase doesn't hold it against Joe Burrow. There's actually a great mic'd up clip. If you listen to this show, you know I am a sucker for a good mic'd up, and I'm looking forward to the full one dropping from the Super Bowl. But there's a great mic'd up clip where Jamar Chase catches the ball and for some reason just isn't like top gear, like he's not sprinting towards the end zone, and he gets caught from behind. Now, I'm not going to call it a loaf, but it was, if he would have just caught and took off, he would have scored. And the mic'd up is Jamar Chase coming back to Joe Burrow. And instead of Joe Burrow being like, come on, dude, like, oh, we got to be locked in, we got to focus, he looks at him and he goes, hey, you see that big, they must have been playing against, I don't know, the Colts. We'll just say it, the Colts. Mm-hmm. See that big painted blue section of the field? That's the end zone. You want to try to get in there. and Jamar Chase is like, man, stop talking to me. And you can just tell that relationship is one where they know when the other messes up that it's not, they trust each other and they allow each other grace. And you need that between your quarterback and your number one. You do. You need that between your quarterback and your number one.
Is that too much power for Bryce?
Just for number one wide receiver.
Okay.
If Bryce goes, you know what? I worked out with Michael Pittman in the offseason last year, and we rented Airbnbs 2 doors down, and we barbecued, and I love Michael Pittman. Go get Michael Pittman. And you're like, okay. And then the next day, Bryce Young walks into your office and goes, and also I want so-and-so to be my tight end. You go, get out of here, Bryce. Why do you want him? Explain to us. All right, get out of here. You don't have final say-so on that one, right? If he comes in and goes, are we looking at this guy to draft from Alabama? We look at everybody to draft from Alabama. That's not exactly Eastern Washington, right? We're all, yes, you may not get this. We're going to evaluate the Alabama Crimson Tide before the draft. Get out of here, Bryce. You can keep him in his his head from getting so big he can't walk through the door, while also understanding that number one wide receiver quarterback thing has to be like a trust above all else. Again, like I said, Jalen and AJ Brown, Tua and Waddle, Burrow and Chase, Stroud and Dell, like those things, they matter. They matter.